I'm Sienna, and let me tell you something. When you're dating a guy who thinks his little business is going to change the world, you learn to play along. Ryder was one of those entrepreneurs, always talking about his vision and his custom athletic wear company like he was the next Steve Jobs. 3 years he'd been grinding away at this thing, and sure, it was growing, but the way he obsessed over every detail made me want to scream sometimes. He'd stay up until 2 a.m. tweaking designs or stressing about suppliers, completely ignoring me sitting right there. But here's the thing. I saw an opportunity where he saw passion. When things started picking up and he was drowning in paperwork, I offered to help. I had the bookkeeping background, and watching him struggle was painful. Not because I felt bad for him, but because he was so damn inefficient. So I became his part-time office manager. The pay wasn't amazing, but it gave me access to everything. His accounts, his suppliers, his complete financial picture. And Ryder, he was so grateful, so trusting. It was almost too easy. That's when Katrina and I started our little game. She's been my best friend since college, and she gets me in ways Ryder never could. We'd always had this thing where we'd bet on stupid stuff. Who'd get hit on first at bars, which of our friends would get engaged next, that kind of thing. But this was different. This was bigger. It started as a joke, really. I was venting to Katrina about how Ryder never noticed anything outside his precious business. I swear, I told her over drinks one night, I could probably steal from him and he'd never even realize. That's when she dared me. $500 said I couldn't skim $5,000 without him catching on. The man who tracked every penny of his business expenses somehow couldn't see what was happening right under his nose. The first time I did it, my heart was racing. I created a fake invoice for marketing services. Nothing huge, just $200. When Ryder approved it without even blinking, I felt this rush. Not just from getting away with it, but from proving how clueless he really was. Here was this guy who thought he was so smart, so business savvy, and he couldn't even protect his own company from his girlfriend. Katrina and I started calling him Mr. Oblivious in our texts. She'd set up this shell company for the fake invoices, and I'd handle the supply orders, ordering extra and returning portions for cash. It became our inside joke. While Ryder stressed about profit margins and growth strategies, I was literally bleeding him dry, and he was thanking me for my help. The worst part? He'd come home exhausted, worried about money, and I'd comfort him. "Don't stress, babe," I'd say, rubbing his shoulders while internally laughing. "You're doing amazing. The money stuff will work itself out." And he'd look at me with such gratitude, like I was his rock. If only he knew his rock was the one sinking his ship. 6 months ago, we moved in together. Ryder kept talking about our future, about building something together. He had no idea I was already building something, just not with him. Every fake invoice, every skimmed dollar was proof that I was smarter than he gave me credit for. While he saw me as his supportive girlfriend, I saw him as my personal ATM. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy my videos, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. By month 8, Katrina and I had turned this into an art form. We weren't just stealing anymore. We were conducting a masterclass in financial manipulation, and Ryder was our unwitting student. The original bet had been won months ago, but we kept going because, look, it was addictive. I'd perfected the supplier scam. Order $1,000 worth of materials, return $300 worth to a different location for cash, and adjust the books to make it look like we'd used everything. Ryder was so focused on the big picture that he never audited the small stuff. When he'd stress about tight margins, I'd suggest cutting costs in other areas, never the ones I was skimming from, obviously. The fake invoices were even better. Katrina's shell company looked completely legitimate online. I'd create invoices for digital marketing consultations or brand strategy sessions, all buzzwords that made Ryder's eyes light up. He'd approve them instantly, probably thinking he was investing in growth. Meanwhile, Katrina and I were splitting the money and laughing about it over expensive dinners. But here's what really got to me. Ryder's complete obliviousness made me lose respect for him. How could someone be so smart about some things and so stupid about others? He'd spend hours researching the best fabric suppliers, but never once questioned why his marketing budget kept ballooning. It was like he wanted to be taken advantage of. Between us, the psychological aspect was almost more satisfying than the money. I was living with this man sleeping next to him every night, and he had no idea I was systematically destroying his financial stability. When he'd wake up stressed about cash flow, I'd make him coffee and tell him everything would be okay. Because for me, it would be. I had my safety net growing bigger every month. I started getting bolder. Instead of small, careful amounts, I'd skim larger chunks. $500 here, $800 there. Ryder was working so hard to grow the business that he attributed any financial struggles to normal growing pains. It takes money to make money. He'd say, completely unaware that it was taking his money to make my money. The funniest part was when he'd try to include me in business discussions. He'd show me spreadsheets and ask for my input on expenses, not realizing I was the biggest expense he couldn't see. I'd nod thoughtfully and suggest optimizations that would make my skimming easier to hide. Katrina and I even started planning what we'd do with our earnings. She wanted to take a trip to Europe. I was thinking about a new car, something Ryder could never afford to buy me, but his business unknowingly could. We'd joke about sending him a postcard from Paris. Thanks for funding our vacation. By month 10, we'd taken nearly $15,000. The original $5,000 bet seemed quaint now. We weren't just proving a point anymore. We were building a lifestyle. And the best part, Ryder was so focused on his dreams that he never noticed his nightmare was sleeping right next to him. Around month 12, things started getting weird. Not bad weird, just different. Ryder was asking more questions about the books, wanting to see receipts for things he'd never cared about before. At first I thought he was just trying to be more involved in the financial side, which irritated me. That was supposed to be my domain. Hey, can you show me the invoice for that marketing consultation last week? He'd ask casually while we were watching TV. I'd pull it up on my laptop. Katrina's fake company looked so professional that I never worried about scrutiny. But something in his tone was different, more focused, less trusting. I started having to be more careful with my texts to Katrina. Before I'd message her openly about our business ventures while Ryder was in the same room. Now I found myself waiting until he was in the shower or out of the apartment. Not because I was scared, I wasn't, but because his new attention to detail was cramping my style. The supply scam was getting trickier too. Ryder had started spot-checking inventory more often, asking questions about usage rates and waste percentages. I had to get creative with my explanations. Oh, that batch was defective, I'd say, or we had to rush that order and some got damaged in shipping. He'd nod and make notes, but I could see him calculating in his head. But there were moments that made me wonder, like when he'd come home and just stare at his laptop screen for hours, scrolling through spreadsheets with this intense concentration I'd never seen before. Or when he'd get phone calls from suppliers and step outside to take them, which he'd never done before. The worst was when he started asking about my old laptop. It had been running slow for months, and I'd been complaining about it constantly. When he offered to help clean it up, I almost said no. But that would have been suspicious, right? So I let him take it for an evening, figuring he'd just delete some old files and call it done. He spent 3 hours on that thing. 3 hours. I kept asking what was taking so long, and he'd just say he was being thorough. When he finally gave it back, everything seemed normal. It was running faster, and all my important files were still there. But something felt off. He was quieter than usual, more distant. That night, he barely touched me. We'd been together for 18 months, and physical affection had never been an issue. But suddenly, he was staying on his side of the bed, flinching slightly when I tried to cuddle. When I asked if everything was okay, he just mumbled something about work stress and turned away. I started watching him more carefully after that. The way he'd look at me sometimes, like he was trying to figure something out. How he'd pause before answering simple questions about the business. The way he'd check his phone constantly, like he was waiting for something important. By month 15, I'd gotten so comfortable with the whole operation that I barely thought about it anymore. Taking money from Ryder's business felt as natural as breathing. We'd refined our system to the point where I could skim $1,000 in a week without breaking a sweat. Katrina and I had moved way past our original bet. We were looking at nearly $17,000 in total earnings. The funny thing was, Ryder seemed to be getting used to the financial pressure. He'd stopped stressing as much about tight margins, probably because he'd accepted that this was just how business worked. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at his accounts with this resigned expression, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd never figure out. It was almost pathetic, really. But then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He suggested we celebrate. I landed that big client I've been chasing, he told me one evening, practically bouncing with excitement. The one with the college athletic program. This could change everything for the business. I knew about the client, of course. I handled all his communications. But seeing him this happy was actually kind of sweet. We should celebrate, he continued. I want to take you and Katrina out to dinner. Somewhere really nice. My treat. He was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. I know I've been distracted lately with work stuff, and you've been so supportive. Both of you have been amazing friends to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. He wanted to celebrate his success by treating the two people who'd been systematically robbing him, but I wasn't about to turn down a free expensive dinner. That sounds amazing, I told him, already mentally picking out what I'd wear. Katrina was thrilled when I told her. It's like he's paying us a bonus. She laughed. How perfect is that? We spent an hour on the phone planning our outfits and joking about how we'd toast to his generosity without him knowing the real meaning. The restaurant he picked was incredible, the kind of place we could never afford on our own, but that his business could definitely handle. White tablecloths, sommelier, the works. Ryder seemed nervous, which I thought was cute. He'd probably never spent this much on a single meal in his life. Katrina and I ordered the most expensive wine on the menu. Why not? We'd earned it. Ryder stuck with water, saying he wanted to stay sharp for some early meetings the next day. Always working that one. Even during our celebration dinner, he couldn't fully relax. The conversation was light and fun. Katrina told stories about her new job. I shared some gossip about mutual friends, and Ryder talked about his plans for expanding the business. He seemed genuinely happy, more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. For a moment, I almost felt bad about what we'd been doing. But then I remembered all those nights he'd ignored me for his spreadsheets, all those times he'd chosen his business over our relationship, all those moments when I'd felt like I was dating a company instead of a person. He'd made his priorities clear, and I'd simply adjusted mine accordingly. After the main course, Ryder stood up with his water glass. I want to make a toast, he said, his voice carrying across our little corner of the restaurant. His hand was shaking slightly, probably nerves about the public speaking. He'd always been awkward with grand gestures. Katrina and I raised our wine glasses, smiling expectantly. This was going to be good. Maybe he'd finally acknowledge how much I'd contributed to his success, how I'd been there through all the struggles and stress. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. To bets? He said, his eyes locked directly on mine. You win. The words hit me like a physical blow. How could he possibly know about our bet? My mind raced through every conversation, every text, every moment when Katrina and I might have slipped up. But we'd been so careful, so discreet. Then he slid his phone across the table and I saw it. Screenshots of our messages. All of them. The original bet are jokes about Mr. Oblivious. Our detailed plans for skimming money. Everything we thought was private laid out in black and white on his screen. My stomach lurched so violently I thought I might throw up right there at the table. Katrina leaned over to look, and I watched her face turn ashen. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Ryder, I can explain, I heard myself say, but my voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. How could I explain this? How could anyone explain systematically stealing from someone they claimed to love? Can you... His voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it. Hurt, anger, betrayal, all mixed together. Can you explain the $17,000? Can you explain calling me Mr. Oblivious? The silence was suffocating. People at nearby tables were starting to stare, sensing the drama unfolding in our corner. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never face this moment. Katrina tried to jump in. Look, it started as a stupid joke. A joke? Ryder's voice cracked slightly. $17,000 is a joke to you. That's when the panic really set in. The tears, the frantic apologies, the desperate explanations that made no sense even to me. I was babbling about how it wasn't really stealing, how I was going to pay it back, how it was just a game that got out of hand. But Ryder wasn't listening. He was pulling out his phone again, and I saw him scrolling through his contacts. "What are you doing?" I grabbed his arm across the table. "Please don't. We can fix this. I can pay you back tomorrow." He pulled his arm away gently, but firmly. "No," he said, his voice finally breaking with the weight of it all. "You can't." I watched in horror as he called the police. Right there in the restaurant with everyone staring, he reported a felony theft. The woman I thought was going to marry was dissolving into a sobbing mess, and all I could think about was how unfair this was. How could he do this to me after everything we'd been through together? The aftermath was a nightmare. The police arrived, separating us for questioning. I gave my statement through tears, trying to explain how it wasn't really stealing because I worked for the company too. They weren't impressed with my logic. Katrina and I were arrested that night. The whole scene was as humiliating as you can imagine, being led out in handcuffs while other diners watched and whispered. We were out on bail within 48 hours, but the damage was done. The worst part wasn't even the legal stuff. It was how everyone turned against me. My parents were mortified. Katrina's family cut her off financially. Our friends took sides, and most of them chose Ryder's side once they heard the full story. I kept trying to contact him, leaving voicemails explaining how lonely I'd been, how the business had consumed his life and left no room for me. I thought if I could just make him understand why I'd done it, he might forgive me, but he never responded. The legal process dragged on for over a year. Katrina's father hired expensive lawyers who tried every trick in the book, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally, that Ryder was a controlling boyfriend trying to destroy me out of spite. But the evidence was too solid, too damning. Eventually, we both had to take plea deals. I got 1 year in county jail with 6 months suspended plus 3 years of probation. Katrina got 2 years in state prison because she'd set up the shell company and harassed Ryder's suppliers after we were caught. Sitting in that courtroom listening to Ryder read his victim impact statement, I finally understood the scope of what I'd done. Not just the money, though $17,000 was devastating to a small business, but the betrayal, the complete violation of trust from someone who'd loved me. But even then, part of me was angry. Angry that he'd been so dramatic about it. Angry that he'd chosen his precious business over our relationship, even at the end. If he'd just talked to me instead of setting this elaborate trap, maybe we could have worked it out. I served 8 months before being released on probation. Katrina did the full 16 months. When I got out, I tried to rebuild my life, but having a felony conviction makes everything harder. Jobs, apartments, relationships. Everything required explanations I didn't want to give. The civil lawsuit came 2 years later. Even though we'd already been convicted, Ryder's lawyer went after us for damages beyond just the money we'd stolen. Lost business opportunities, the cost of securing his finances, reputational damage. The final judgment was nearly $80,000. I'm still paying it off bit by bit through wage garnishments from my job at a diner. Every month, a portion of my paycheck goes to Ryder, a constant reminder of what I'd done. Katrina's trust fund protects her from most of it, but any money she tries to access gets seized. Look, I know what I did was wrong. I'm not stupid. But the way Ryder handled it, the elaborate setup, the public humiliation, the complete destruction of my life, that was cruel. He could have just confronted me privately. We could have worked out a payment plan. Instead, he chose to make an example of me. 3 years later, I barely think about him anymore. I heard through mutual friends that his business is thriving now that he's dating someone new. Good for him, I guess. He got his justice and his happy ending. Me, I'm still here, still paying for a stupid bet that spiraled out of control, still dealing with the consequences of trusting the wrong person with my heart and my secrets. But I'm surviving, and sometimes that's enough. The truth is, I played a game I thought I couldn't lose. Turns out I was the only one playing.